I mean, what are we going to do? We're going to stand by idly and watch it all.
Following Bloody Sunday, there was a tremendous upsurge of nationalist feeling throughout Ireland. Large demonstrations were held north and south, and in Dublin, a 30,000-strong crowd burnt down the British Embassy. For the first time, the nationalist resistance had assumed threatening proportions in the south, where Britain still had important economic interests. The British government had little choice but to make major concessions. On March 24, 1972, the Unionist government was suspended by London, and Britain promised to release the internees. That Easter, as the nationalists in Derry held their annual commemoration of the 1916 Rising, the resistance movement was apparently in its strongest position since the start of the war.
Of their destiny. On one hand, if we are determined, if we are courageous, if we are resolute, and if we are strong-willed enough to recognize that compromise will not solve our country's problems, if we recognize that compromise never achieved anything, and that compromise never will achieve anything, and that therefore our fight must continue and that we will win that fight, then we are truly following in the footsteps of the men and the women and the boys and girls of Easter week. Suspending operations at Christmas and at Easter, and in implementing a 3-day unilateral truce on March 10th, 11th and 12th last. In addition, we have held wide-ranging talks with various groups and parties with a view to holding an all-Irish conference. Would you first
yes, isn't it politically very difficult, if not impossible, for Mr. Whitelaw to do as you suggest, in view of the high emotions being engendered amongst Protestants, particularly with the forthcoming weekend?
Well, my reply to that would be this, that if Mr. Whitelaw and his government are sincerely interested in peace, then they'll be prepared to discuss our terms with us.
We were anxious to discuss our proposals with the representatives of the British government, but we were determined that if there was going to be a truce, it was going to be a bilateral truce. It was going to be one that would be publicly recognised by the British, and that would be conditions that would be binding on the British Army as well as on the Republican Army, and this was done. Then we went to London and we met Mr. Whitelaw and members of his political staff, and we listened to what he had to say, which didn't amount to very much, and then we presented our own document, our own proposals, and which we called upon the British government to recognise the right of the Irish people as a whole, acting as a single unit to decide the future of Ireland, and we called upon the British government to withdraw all their forces by a specified date. Mr. Whitelaw didn't turn down our proposals. He said he would refer them back to his cabinet, and this is what I believe brought about the ending of the truce, that Mr. Whitelaw went back to Ted Heath, who was Prime Minister at the time, showed him our document, our proposals. Ted Heath read them and turned around and said, well, I don't think there's anything can be done here. You'd better break the truce as soon as you can. And in fact, the truce broke on the following Sunday night, and it nearly broke that morning in Portadown, where there was severe provocation, and it broke on that Sunday night. It was inevitable in view of the behaviour of the British troops in Lenadoon, in Belfast, that the truce was going to break. It broke, with tragic results for everybody concerned, but for tragic results for the Irish people, for the English people, tragic results for the British troops and the IRA volunteers and the civilians who've been killed since then. And I hope that the day will come again when British representatives realise that the only way to a permanent peace in Ireland is to meet the representatives of the Republican movement and negotiate with them a phased and orderly withdrawal.
2 days after the peace talks in London, the truce broke down in the Lenadoon housing estate of Belfast. There, 16 displaced nationalist families had been allocated homes by the Public Housing Authority, but the homes bordered a loyalist district, and the Ulster Defence Association, the largest of several loyalist paramilitary groups, opposed the move. In turn, the British Army refused to permit the families to enter the houses. In the confrontation that day in Lenadoon, 6 civilians were shot dead. In the next week, 13 British soldiers were killed. It was the end of a truce which had lasted barely 2 weeks.